and maybe allow ourselves to think a while about what we think that the authors were trying to do.
And also, are they making a persuasive case for this reclaiming of democracy? So what were they trying to do? What are their major arguments? And do they make a persuasive case for that?
Well, and that kind of begs the question that left me wondering, what does reclaiming democracy mean? I mean, we had a lot of conversation about what is democracy, and I think we had generally a common understanding about what that meant. But what it meant to reclaim, I mean, part of that implies that there wasn't, that it was absent.
Or that we had it.
Or, yeah, more than that, that it was there to begin with, and
Was
it went
it?
away, and then it came back. So what is that about?
I actually today, in preparation for this, went back to look up that word again because I was curious.
Reclaim?
You're the
Reclaim.
dictionary queen. Yeah, go for it.
Well, and the definition that I ended up writing down for today was reclaim means to redeem from a state of vice, which I thought was very interesting because I wasn't resonating with the idea of reclaim as to bring back to what was there before in light of how I experienced this book. So that was the definition that I took away, and which was very interesting then, I think, juxtaposed next to democracy. Reclaiming, which is to redeem from a state of vice. Democracy. And I guess my interest in that was just, is it possible, if you're starting from that perspective, that where we are is a state of vice, and all these things are wrong or bad, is it possible then to really engage in the democratic process, was my question.
Because I think when you put that word vice in, it triggers for me, oh my gosh, this is a state that is not moral. And education is nothing. I mean that seriously, is nothing if not a moral endeavor. That is the heart of education. Because we touch the lives of children. I'm not thinking about morality in terms of catechism. I'm thinking in terms of the endeavor itself being to constitute life, help grow life, so that life flourishes, not in any one particular way. But the touching of the word vice now has just brought another shift in my mind about, how, is this as the morality of teaching?
Well, I think that's one of the arguments that the authors were making was that the current state of education is so market-based, it's so based on the cultural values and the political ideologies of the time that we have lost this whole set of values linked to citizenry and democracy. And then the question is how do we reform that? Or how do we move to a new place?
So that was one of the things we spent a lot of time talking about early on, was that it seemed like most of the book, at least the first kind of front-loaded, was a lot about problems with, especially No Child Left Behind, which is the subtitle of the book, which is Reclaiming Education for Democracy, Thinking Beyond No Child Left Behind. So that was the context in which it was written. And there was quite a bit of information about the corporate influences in education today, the idea that education, the purpose of education is largely to train workers rather than that kind of liberal arts focus for kids, and information about not just corporate influence in raising workers, but also the monetary influences behind education itself, textbooks, testing, and
It's an industry.
yeah, the
of
whole industry that
enormous
supports education in its current form. And whether we go down the vice track or not, at least there is, the authors, I think, have a pretty significant belief that those are not, as you would say, moral influences on, or later on as they come to discuss it as humanistic
Right.
perspectives about how to think about what education is for in a democracy. So that's kind of what led us to that, if you will, negative perspective.
Right. And I don't know if they're necessarily saying that those influences, that we can just, sweep them under the rug and that they're going to disappear, as much as I feel that they're encouraging us to reintroduce the humanistic complexity of education's purpose and what that would look like and how we then show that and how we talk about it. So
I think they were trying to avoid that what Dewey calls the either or. The humankind really likes to make everything black and white, either or.
Do you think they were trying to avoid it? I mean, one of the things we talked a lot about is how we felt like there was so much of it.
There was.
On the one hand, they were complaining about it in kind of the constant references to neoliberal influences behind, not even behind the scenes, but overtly in front of the scenes. And yet we found that as much as they kind of saw that as a negative influence, they fell into that trap themselves.
They fell into that trap. But again, the generous read. I have a sense as I think back on the book that the power of these forces, this concentrated power of unbelievable greed that now is infiltrating, because when you and I began classroom teaching, I'll bet we did not have, there was a barrier between corporations and school. You would not find brand name juice machines, or you'd find Apple machines at best. You would not find fast foods in our cafeteria.
And media sponsors for internal communication systems and
No advertising. So the infiltration of and the creating of a semi-permeable and now absolutely there is no barrier. When you go to even children's games in high school, there's all the
stadiums and
there is incredible amounts of advertising. So the sense of trying to make not an either or, but to try to unpack this, I am sure, as they began to critique and analyze and write to this, was a powerful force in and of itself to say, this is so serious. So yes, I would agree that they did dichotomize, but I'll say it's because it is, for them, it is a matter of democratic life or democratic death. And so there is that sense of, do you see what is happening? And they did fall into the trap of either, just like I'm doing. Right? Okay. Yeah.